Last year, I had a class that refused to engage in Socratic seminar. And I don't just mean hesitant, I mean full-on shutdown. Every question was met with a silence so absolute, I could hear the hum of my fluorescent lights. I couldn't tell if it was fear, boredom, or if the students had coordinated an assault on my own comfortability in my own classroom. But one day, instead of forcing another futile attempt at structured discussion, I walked into class with a beach ball. I tossed it in the air, and before I could second-guess myself, the games had begun. Desks were pushed aside, laughter replaced hesitation, students and teachers were serving, setting, spiking, and engaging in ways I hadn't yet seen. So I doubled down. Next class, paper airplane contest. We stood at the top of Manchester Stadium and launched them into the abyss. Some soared, some nosedived instantly, some veered alarmingly toward other students. So as I stood there contemplating my next career move, because clearly I was about to be fired, I realized something that might have saved my career. The students were finally thinking. And not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Experimenting, refining, debating. All things I had been trying and unfortunately failing to cultivate in my own classroom. Because for weeks I had forced my students into structured discussion, training them to engage the right way. But their silence wasn't defiance. They weren't unwilling to think, they were just afraid to be wrong. And the more I rewarded certainty over curiosity, the more I taught them to play it safe. I wasn't just failing to spark their creativity, I was actively conditioning them to avoid it. Because the more we focus on doing things the right way, the more we hesitate. And that's kind of how this happens. Little by little, we stop playing, we stop experimenting, and we stop taking risks without the fear of failure. So I'm Aaron Martinez. I'm a teacher here at Cathedral, and for 7 years, I've worked to make learning more engaging, more meaningful, and longer lasting. And along the way, I realized we don't lose our creativity, we unlearn it. We trade play for productivity and risk-taking for correctness. But what if play wasn't something to outgrow? What if it was something to reclaim? So today I want to explore how rediscovering play makes us more creative, more adaptable, and more resilient, both in the classroom and beyond. We tend to think of creativity and intelligence as linked, but research actually suggests otherwise. While IQ scores have steadily risen over the decades, creativity scores have fallen, especially since the 1990s. So while each generation is getting smarter, they're also losing the very thing that makes them innovative. Dr. Paul Torrance, a pioneer in creativity research, developed the Torrance tests of creative thinking in the 1950s to measure divergent thinking in children, the ability to generate multiple novel solutions to a problem rather than converging on a single answer. Well, decades later, Dr. Kyung-hee Kim at the College of William & Mary analyzed nearly 300,000 of these test results, and she found a very troubling trend. Children today score significantly lower in creativity research than past generations. And so the question is why? Well, cognitive scientists point to increased academic pressures, more structured schedules, and less opportunity for unstructured play as the reason for this discrepancy. So while we're not getting less intelligent, we are getting less creative. And it's not because we lose the ability, it's because we're trained out of it. The good news is creativity isn't a talent, it's a skill that you can rebuild, and one of the best ways to reawaken it is through play. So Dr. Stuart Brown, the founder of the National Institute for Play, has spent decades studying how play interacts with human behavior and brain function. And his research shows that play activates the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and this activation helps reduce stress, foster innovation, and improve mental clarity. So play really isn't just for children, it's a biological necessity. Now, whether you're sketching, gardening, or experimenting with a new recipe, what matters is the mindset, that you're engaging for the joy of the process, not for the outcome. Because play isn't a luxury, it's a tool. It's a way to think better, to feel better, and to live better. So last year, I had a student, and we'll call him Ben, and Ben was the perfect example of how play doesn't just spark creativity, but it also helps build resilience. Ben was a great student, but writing just never felt like his thing, and I saw it come to a head during a written assessment. He looked dejected, his responses felt rushed and surface level, and not indicative of the level of student that I knew he was. And so I stood there perplexed, because I wanted to help him. And that's when I remembered something. Ben played guitar. So instead of asking him to revise his work and turn it in again, I walked up to him and I said, hey, what if today, instead of writing an essay, you wrote a song instead? And for the first time all class period, he smiled. He looked up at me and he said, seriously? Seriously. And so he got to work. Lyrics filled the page. Rhymes that reflected the material, metaphors that captured the complexity of the topic. The same concepts that had just felt forced in his essay now flowed naturally into verses. And so we listened to the song together, and he was proud. Not only proud of his work, but proud that for the first time all year, an assessment didn't feel like a battle that he had to win. Because resiliency is more than just about pushing through frustration, it's about finding another way in, a way that makes the effort feel worth it. And that's what play does. It reframes challenges, it turns frustrations into experiments, and it reminds us that struggling doesn't mean we're failing, it just means we haven't yet found our way. So I want you to think back to your childhood for a moment. I want you to think of your favorite game. Maybe it was stacking pillows into forts, drawing chalk masterpieces on the driveway, or leaping from couch to chair because clearly the floor was lava. Back then, play wasn't something we scheduled or justified, it just was. But then we grew up, and play became something to avoid, something unproductive, and something that we needed to leave behind. But what if our paradigm is wrong? What if creativity, fulfillment, and resilience aren't found in avoiding play, but by reclaiming it? So here's my challenge to you all. This week, do one thing simply because it makes you smile. Dance, sing, pick up a pencil and draw something. No pressure, no expectations, just see what happens. Lose yourself in the movement, in the laughter, in the sheer joy of doing something just to do it. Because that's when I remember the beach ball and the paper airplanes and the beautiful chaos of those moments. But it was never about the games themselves. It was always about what those games unlocked. The act of creativity, the joy of discovery, and the freedom to experiment without hesitation. And that freedom still exists. It's still in your hands, the same hands that once reached instinctively to build, create, and explore, not for a grade, not for a purpose, but because a voice inside your head just said to try. So stop waiting, take it back, and play.